This might be the last Monster drink I ever buy, guys. Monster is kind of suing Nintendo for Pokemon, of course, then Pokemon Company, Capcom for Monster Hunter, they the same name, right? And they already had successfully gone after Ubisoft, right, for a game. Let's talk about it here. If you don't know, guys, right, I worked in games for many years, and I have worked at Disney when it comes to copyright and trademarking. So I think it's a very interesting topic here, right? How Monster is going after these companies. And I have a lot of stories with a similar thing, how companies can kind of harass other companies to make money, right? So before I even go into the whole Monster thing, let me explain how this works, right? So it's very common, actually. The company like Monster, it's because they have the same name, do this right. Another company I actually have worked for, which is Blizzard, right? Activision Blizzard, that today then owns Candy Crush with King in Sweden, right? They have harassed, for example, companies having the name Saga, right? Because of Candy Crush Saga. So they are suing people that have the name Saga in their games, right? So we see this as a very, very common thing. But at least, not to defend Activision Blizzard here and King, which is a massive corporation, but at least in their case, Candy Crush Saga, suing like Saga Story or Saga Frontier or whatever, or Saga Banner and so on, right? At least those sort of game companies, right? Monster is trying to trademark or sue video game companies that are not producing Monster beverage. At least Candy Crush and the similar farm sagas. These are video games, right? These are not even the same kind of thing. So I'm a little bit like, yeah, okay, Monster. That's kind of that's interesting. It is interesting. It feels more crazy, right? I feel the surprise Pikachu face is perfect here. It feels more interesting. But anyway, let me try this to work a little bit. So, whatever Disney, right, is a common issue that basically just by having the same title, you can sue people. Doesn't mean you will win, right? But it's kind of like a weird legal thing. So basically, I have this thing called Monster. And you also have Monster. And now I file trademark before you file trademark. So now I can sue you if you use my trademark. So I own Monster. I can now sue you because you have Monster Hunter or whatever. And if I do that, I probably won't win in court, but you might have to pay your lawyers, which is very expensive. So now you don't want to pay those lawyers, or you want to pay them slightly less, right? So what happens is that you might settle with me, right? I have been in court many times in my life, actually. You might think, I've been in court many times. I have sued people myself and won 4 times, and I've been in court and so on. And I sued, I example, a video game company I worked at, talking about too much here, but I sued a company I worked for because of intellectual property rights, right? Like they own me the properties. So, for example, I designed this game, and then I also designed and so on the next game, right? So I haven't worked on that game a lot the next game, but it's my ID, the game, right? And other stuff like the storyline and narration and so on. So I sued them, and they have successfully then given me the rights to the game I worked on, and also some other games there, the actual storylines. If I want to post a book or whatever, if I want to take those characters in another game, I can do that because they actually have signed the waiver to me to own the copyright of those games. So I'm actually quite worse on this thing on my own experience. But basically, right, it's a kind of weird how it works because if I sue you first, or rather, if I trademark first, I now own it. That's kind of what Monster is doing, right? And this actually is called trademark trolling. So, for example, when I went to EA this many years ago, we had one guy in America and USA. He used to sue EA, another company. He sued smaller game companies because he owned like some lyrics to some song or some kind of. He had bought old songs, but he hadn't really bought them, but kind of had bought the rights for classical music in America. Then he was trying to sue game companies using classical music, and it kind of worked until he sued EA, and then they just owned him because they were like, "No, we can't do that." So the thing is that smaller companies, right, unfortunately, they fall for that. They're like, "Oh, this guy is suing here. He has the paper right to like Mozart in America. Okay, we have to sue him. We have to just give him the money because it's cheaper to give him the money, right, than to pay the lawyers." But EA in this case, if you Google this thing, they were like, "No, we have a normal amount of money, and this thing is actually in not fair use, but it's called public domain, right?" You might have seen that Winnie the Pooh thing, that Winnie the Pooh is not public domain. So EA was like, "No, but this is public domain or this thing or whatever. You don't own the rights to that." So they just paid the lawyers to fight him, right, and he lost them, right? So it's a very common issue that the bigger the companies are, right, that you sue them, it's harder to actually push away. Smaller game companies will fall for this kind of monster thing, right? Because they can't fight, the giant, right? Or for them it's like, oh, the cost of my lawyer is so expensive, so I'd rather kind of just give you money. I guess a similar comparison is what we see in affordable on YouTube, where YouTubers get sued, right, by, or more so copyright kind of almost harassed by specific companies. I haven't happened to me a few times, but it happened to other people a lot more than me, of course. They like react to public domain stuff like TV shows or whatever, right? And then there's another company owning domains of that. They're suing them and say, "Oh, we're gonna copyright strike you. Unless you pay us money." This would probably never win in court, right? They will lose the court immediately. But do I want to pay $1 million to go to court for this thing, or do I give you $1,000, right? So it actually is called copyright trolling, and it is a common thing. I have seen many times. It happened to me in the industry. We have been trying to sue for this times. For example, I love to use, in my own design, right, I love to use references to gods and so on. So we had one guy trying to kind of sue us for, oh, you can't use the word like Kronos or those kind of things. Like Kronos, that's not owned by you. That's like an old Greek mythology. You can't have, it's like freaking public domain, man. You know what I mean? So it's a common issue. And it's a show here. I have a monster. I actually do dream monster, but maybe I stop buying it now then, the Pikachu here. But let me explain this to defend myself here. But it might be my last series, right? I have a tendency, this is completely honest when I explain it, that I like to buy every kind of different energy drink, okay? I drink energy drink, I don't drink coffee and so on, but I drink energy drinks, right? And I buy a bunch of different ones. You might see me, especially when I stream, that I have many different flavors. I also buy, a lot of protein shakes because I go to the gym all the time, right? I always gym before I stream, so I need to get my push. So I tend to just buy every Monster flavor, every Red Bull flavor. I used to be sponsored by Red Bull in the past, and then of course we have the purple flavor and this flavor as well. So I have a tendency, it's a place close where I live, where they sell all kind of food. So they have a lot of, it's basically like an American store. It's more like an American store. It's basically like American town, but I love to go there because they have all the different weird like energy flavors in from America, right? Because I don't live in America. And I can go there, I can buy the different monsters, and so I like to go there and buy the root beers. And I'm just that guy, okay? That's why I have like, I don't know what this is, like a watermelon monster, right? I buy one flavor of each, not just monster, but I mean all of the different energy brands that I can find, right? It's just a thing, okay? And every time I go to different countries, I need to buy all the different flavors. I'm just that kind of guy, okay? That's my defense. I just have to test all the flavors. My favorite flavor is super dry, but this might be the last time I buy a monster seeing this thing. Let's look at the article a little bit here. But I hope you guys understand where I'm coming from, right? It's very common. As soon as you're the first trademark guy, you kind of own it. Of course, logically it makes no sense though, because logically, right, as you see in the article here when you cover about Pokémon and so on, from comic book, link below of course, is that, however, this makes no sense, right? Because as I say here, they have been suing now then Monster Hunter and Pokémon, right? Monster Hunter, of course, owned by Capcom, which have the title Monster in it. So I can really see how they're trying to sue it, right? Because it makes sense that they might have, because Monster has very likely owns the trademark of the actual Monster beverage, right, in Japan. Very likely, and probably the rest of the world too, but especially Japan, then, right, in this case. So they can now try to trademark sue Monster Hunter for using the same title, Monster, right, in their product. However, as I mentioned earlier, it really makes little to no sense, right, from any like normal standpoint, because to sue people in trademark, you have to argue that people will misunderstand, you know what I mean, like this is this thing, that thing, right? Like I said earlier, when Candy Crush sued people, and I actually knew some people that worked in this Banner Saga, so, so I actually know some insight there, but when they sued these Saga games, right, like I said earlier again, at least those people were making the same kind of industry, the same kind of product, they're making video games, right? No one here in Japan or the rest of the world thinks that Monster Hunter is produced by Monster, the beverage company. They're two completely different things. They're not even remotely the same. The only argument like see Monster has is that they do sponsor, you know, They don't sponsor me for this video. Sponsor me, Monster. I haven't ruined the video, basically, right? They don't sponsor me, right? They sponsor people, esporters. Red Bull, very notoriously, right, has sponsored people for, you know, fighting games, etc., right? You know, League, right? Actually, one of my best friends used to work at Red Bull. One of my best friends, we met when we worked at Blizzard, like this, like a decade ago. And after that job, he got a job as a Red Bull esport guy. Yeah, so after working at Blizzard, we worked together for like a year, and then he started working at Red Bull as their like esport kind of like, you know, coordinator and so on. And then actually I got sponsored by Red Bull, a lot of contact and so on, right? So that's kind of how it goes in the industry. But yeah, point. So Vanity, I'm on Red Bull, but I'm not afflicted with Red Bull right now. I used to be very clear here. I am not currently sponsored by Red Bull or any company I work with, but I used to be, okay? So I might be arguably I'm biased because I used to work for Red Bull, arguably, and I work for it, you know, indirectly. But anyway, I digress. But for any clear and sense here, right? I am not paid by Red Bull. I'm paid by Pokémon Vanity, right? But anyway, Mimikyu. It doesn't make much sense, right? The only thing, like I said, I can see it happening is because they do sponsor a lot of esport people, right? But that's the only thing, right? You can see they actually been trying already earlier to sue for Pokemon, apparently X and Y. I didn't know it. This article here. Pokemon Moon and Sun, Monster Hunter Cross, what more is it? The very notorious thing is this thing, right? That they actually went after Immortals Fenyx Rising. So this is a game from Ubisoft, which I had never played, but people tell me it's a terrible game. But the original title of this game was actually Gods and Monsters. So they actually did Trademark sue Ubisoft and forced them to change it to Fenyx Rising instead of calling it Gods and Monsters, because obviously Monsters is the title. So you can see it's very similar, right, to Monster Hunter, of course, which is the, you know, very famous, of course, Capcom game, which I played. Iceborne, I played. I like Monster Hunter. It's not my favorite game, but I like it, you know. I haven't actually tested that new game. Leave a comment below. I can't remember the name called now, but it's another game similar to Monster Hunter. I haven't tested it yet from another Japanese company, but I might buy that, whatever. Leave a comment below if you like the game. Anyway, you get the point, right? Because they have the same title, they can trademark it. But it really makes no sense. Because it doesn't make any sense, because they're in the same product. And luckily so far, they have lost out completely in Japan, right? One issue though I have from an ethical standpoint, I hope you can understand it from a legal trademark standpoint, it's really weird because basically, again, the trademark owner is the one that first files the paperwork, basically, right? So you have the trademark if you're the first to go to court, basically. Before you go to court, you file trademark, then you can sue them. That's how the trolling works, right? Basically, you can have a company like Nintendo, 150-year-old company, right? But if they never trademark the word Nintendo, if I go to the store and do it now, I own the trademark Nintendo. That's how it works, right? Which is very, very strange. Now, I'm sure Nintendo has trademarked the word Nintendo. But, you know, the word monster, right? Mimikyu here, falling down. Maybe he wasn't trademarking, right? And that's very strange, but how it works. And from an ethical standpoint, though, it does bother me, right? It really does, guys, because think about it. Fine, maybe Monsters has trademarked the word monster before. Now, I don't remember when Monster, the company, was, when the company launched, right? Monster Beverage. But I feel pretty sure that Pokémon is an older company. Nintendo is, of course, much older. But you see here, I'm going to go to Wikipedia. We're going to see when Monster was founded. 2020. It was 80 years ago. But when were they called Monster? Because they were called Hansen in the beginning. Okay. I know they're stock traded and they did a stock split just recently. So the stock is half of it was, roughly speaking. It's owned by Coca-Cola, 20% of stock. And I know it's sponsoring NASCAR and so on. I'm just wondering what was the Monster brand called? Because it wasn't called Monster in the beginning. Should have done it before I did the video. Because I know the stock you said a stock split, so I work a lot with stock trading and so on, right? So now we're getting into deep mid-morning stuff here. So the stock was at like 96 or 100 or so a week ago, and now it's like 52. That is because they have a stock split, right? So if you look at here, you can see now that the stock has fallen by 50%, but that is not because of this thing. So to be explained, I'll bring that here, so I'll point out, okay. The stock has not fallen 50%. They have a stock split. But every time stuff like this happens, I see people like, oh, well, Toei is fallen because of this guy. No. the company's a stock split, okay? The company, on some sites, you're gonna see that the stock has fallen by 50%. That is because they have a split, right? The stock value hasn't fallen. If you own the stock, you're gonna have 2 stocks instead of 1 stock, right? But I believe a lot of people are gonna complain and say, "Oh, look at it fallen." You maybe can see it here. Look at that. There you can see it. You can see this fall. It happened recently. You can see a fall happening on different sites, but that's because they have stock split. So again, I just want to point it out here. So don't go on some YouTuber and be like, "Oh, this guy is right. The stock has fallen 50% in 1 week because they're suing Nintendo." No, the stock has stock split. I know I'm like a child, but I just want to point it out that every time this thing happens in the media, I see people, for example, totally not Mark right last year, or 2 years ago, whatever, when Toei and him had this corporate thing, right? The stock was falling for Toei. There were so many people on Twitter tweeting that, "Look at the stock of Toei, they're falling because they're fighting with Little Mark." No, he's a big YouTuber, but he's not that big, okay? The stock was falling because the macro economy was falling, like Sony, every company in Japan was falling like 20% because of Corona, right? Of the after inflation and then Corona and so on. So it's like, no, I don't think the stock of Toei is falling because of a YouTuber. I think it's because of inflation. I just want to point it out, guys. The stock has had a split last week or whatever that was. Very recently, it was a split. That is why it's fallen 15%. So some sites will show you 50% split. But anyway, guys, what do you guys think? Is this crazy? I think it is. It's bonkers, right? As I say here again in the article, it is. It doesn't make any sense because they don't have the same. They don't even have the same, product, the same companies. They have done it over 100 times, right? It's crazy. But what I want people to understand, though, as I mentioned earlier, is that affordably, though, it is a good business to do it, right? Most is the notorious trademark troll because it is an easy way to make money. As I explained earlier, if I sue you for trademarking and I have the trademark, right, even if you actually win in court, you might rather just give me $1,000 so that you don't have to fight me in court, right? Because even if you legally can win, you're like, "Oh, it's not worth standing my ground because if you can settlement outside of court, I can make less. It's going to cost me more money to pay my lawyers, right, to go to court with you and then win in court or just pay out, right?" Like personally, like I said, I sued people, right, and I've been in this trademark and so on, right? For example, once I sued a guy, right? He owed me money, right? He owed me money for like something. He didn't pay for that, so he literally owed me money, like legally. I would never lose in court for this thing, right? But eventually, I was like, okay, if he's giving me the money, basically, we kind of, unfortunately, I have to admit, he kind of won in the way because I agreed to take less money, right? Because I could see it would take me months, right, to get the money back. And, lawyer fee and so on. So I was like, okay, either I pay these lawyers and this thing and that thing, we go to court, it's like months of this thing, blah, 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 and then I get, let's say, $50,000, right? But I lose, let's say, $25,000 because of all the court fees and so on. Or I sue you now, and we settle, and I get 40, right? That was kind of thing for me. I actually lost money on that, from total, right? But if I had gone to the whole thing, it would take me months. I would have lost money, right? Having to sue him for the money he owed me, right? It was worth settling out of court and getting the money immediately, right? So that's kind of when you were actually the victim. I was victim in the case, right? But unfortunately, I kind of agreed to, okay, let's just do it out of court because I don't want to spend months on this thing, right? I don't want to spend massive lawyer fees to get me my money, right? Because then I will lose money, right? I have to sue you. And it depends. Sometimes in court you can sue and they have to pay your fees, right? But this wouldn't be one of those cases. It's not a country, so different laws, depending on the situation, like contractual things. So it's much more complicated, of course, than I'm giving it right now. But I don't think in that kind of case that I could have sued for him paying my legal fees because it's like a weirder contractual, who had broken the contract, NDA, so on. I can't explain it, in detail. But it's my point out, right? Usually, unfortunately, you kind of want to settle the court because it's cheaper. But anyway, guys, longer video than I planned for. What do you guys think? Monster keeps suing Nintendo, and it's sick to look at too because they've been suing them, and I didn't notice, right? They've been suing them for years too. X and Y, Sun and Moon. So they're suing them for like every Pokemon game. That's crazy, and every time they're trying to make Nintendo pay them, let's say, like $1,000, right? Oh, pay us $10,000 and we won't sue you for Violet or something, you know, Scarlet and Violet. It's crazy, right? Like, that makes the pocket change. And it's so, like, pathetic in a way, because they know, certainly, they can't win this, right? So they're just trying to get Nintendo to, like, give them some little ukana. Give me a little yen, you know, give me 10 yen for this thing. Like, what? It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Not even the same production. I kind of feel like I might not buy more Monster in this thing. It might be my last Monster I buy. You know, standing my ground here, and then tomorrow I buy 10 more, but no, probably not. Tastes terribly. Never again, yes, never again.